We're working on the general math STAR prep for the STAR test, and it's on page 15 in the general math book, problem 7. We've got two fractions, 3/8 divided by, you want to write this down in your book, divided by -1/6. Okay, so the division of fractions, how do you solve a problem when you divide two fractions and one of them is, you got a division going on? You multiply, but before you can multiply, you have to do what? You have to flip the second fraction upside down. So if you flip it upside down, then we change the problem to multiplication as soon as we use the reciprocal. So 6/1. So all I did so far was flip the second fraction upside down, and it becomes a multiplication. So now I can just multiply straight across. Now you can cross cancel first to make it easier, but you could just multiply straight across right now if you wanted to. But I like to cross cancel because it actually saves time. So we look diagonally between the 3 and the 1. We look diagonally here, 3 and 1. There's no way to cancel those down any smaller. But the 6 and the 8, you can cancel those smaller, reduce those, because there's a number that divides evenly into both. 2 does. So if I divide 2 into 6, that leaves 3. If I divide 2 into 8, that leaves 4. So now I can multiply straight across. That gives me 3 times 3 is 9. And then 4 times 1 is 4. So 9/4. Yeah, that's an improper fraction. So you may not see that answer on the test. Is it on there? No, it isn't. They expect you to change it to a mixed number. So how do you do that? You just take, well, if the number on the top is larger than the bottom number, well, what you'll need to do is divide, right? A fraction is a division problem, right? So that just means, this also means 9 divided by, 9 divided by 4, right? So that's 2 1/4, because 4 divides into 9 twice, leaves 1 left over. So 2 1/4, good. 2 1/4, and that's the answer for letter D. Alright. So general math, STAR prep, page 15, problem 9. That problem looks like this. It says find the product of 2.3 and 21.7. Okay, product means what? Anthony? Product. It means, no, it means what operation? It's going to be either addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. It's going to be, no, product means multiplication. Yeah, so anytime you see the word product, you got to know that that means multiplication. So we're going to multiply 21.7 times 2.3, and then we're going to get an answer. You have to multiply that out. What if you were going to just estimate that? What would you say if you... No, you might be able to get it right, but if I was going to estimate it, what would I estimate? What two numbers would I use? I'd probably use 21, because that's close to... I'd round this one down to 21. No. I'd round it up, right? Because it's large. You need to round it up to 22. I'd round this one down to 2. So if I was to estimate that just to see roughly what if it's close, that's closer to 22, that's closer to 2. So if I was to multiply these two, I'd get 44. Let's look at the answers and see what's there. On number 9, we've got 44. Is there one that's close to 40? So just by estimating, I would have to go with B, right? Right? Would you go with B? It's the closest. without going over. So I would just, without having to do all the actual multiplication, I would estimate it at 40 at letter B. But if I wanted to check it to make sure I'm right, I would go ahead and multiply it out. So 21.7 times 2.3. And if you forgot how to multiply these decimals, then pay attention. 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 6, 0, 14, 2, 3, 4. Add them up. 1, 9, 9, 4. Bring down your decimal 2 places. 49.91. Now look, there is a 49. So if we didn't multiply it out, we would have got it wrong because our estimate wasn't close enough. We had a good chance though. We had a 50-50 chance. We knew that it couldn't be 24. It couldn't be C or D, right? We knew we had a 50-50 chance. But to actually get the exact answer, we needed to multiply it out. Our test prep for general math, page 15, problem 11. This one says find the sum of these three numbers. So in order to do this problem, you need to know what sum means. Addition, right? So we're going to add up those four numbers. And so sum is the key word, meaning addition. So we want to just add those numbers up. And so what do we do when we have decimal numbers and we add them? What do we have to do? What do we do with the decimal? What does that tell us to do? Well, it has something to do with how you line up the numbers. With addition, see, with multiplication on the last problem, it didn't matter if we lined up the decimals because it doesn't matter in multiplication. Here, you have to line up. See, well, look at the number 38. It just has 38 like that, but it doesn't have a decimal in it. Do you know where the decimal is if you don't see one? It's after the 8. It's all the way on the right. So you got to know where the decimal is if you don't see one. That's critical. Then you have to line up all the decimals like this. See how I wrote I lined everything up by the decimal number in the middle. Okay, now I just add zeros. Okay? So hopefully you're writing this down. And then you need to add those numbers up. And then where do you put the decimal in the answer? You just move it straight down. So, right. So 190.626. And so you look at the answers here, and there's a 190.526. So I may have made an error. So let's check it. Yeah, I did. This is a 5. Okay, but as you can see, there was no other answers even close to that. 190.526, that's the letter B. Okay, any questions? Page 15, problem 12 on the general math test prep, and that is simplify, and it says simplify -4 to the 5th power. Okay, so how would you simplify that? What does the 5th power mean? When you have a number to the 5th power, does that mean 4 times what? It's 4, yeah, 5 times, right? It's 4 times 4 times 4. Okay, so now each one of those is a -4, right? Because it's a -4 every time. So there's a funny thing. when you have an exponent that's odd, like this case, you know that it's going to wind up being a negative answer. If it's even, it's going to be a positive answer. Why? Because a negative times a negative is a positive. So if it's an odd exponent, in this case it's odd, right? It's a 5, then your answer is going to be negative. If it's odd exponent. If it's an even exponent, your answer will be positive. Now you have to multiply this out. So it's going to be 4 times 4 is 16. Again, 4 times 4 is 16. Now you see the way that I'm writing this to do the multiplication? This is the fastest, easiest way for you to multiply 4 times 4. If you try to multiply it 16 and then multiply that times 4, it's going to be a lot more work. Do it the way that I'm doing it. And then what's 16 times 16? Well, that's the tough part. You have to multiply that out. Okay. How to get 36? Because 6 times 6. And then add that. 256. Okay. If you need to practice that, you can just practice that on your own. Just write down what I have. So 256. And then there's one more 4 I haven't touched, right? This 4 on the end. I haven't multiplied that times anything yet. Yeah, you still have to multiply that. No, it's 256. No, times 4. Times 4. So you got to multiply that out. Now I just looked at it and did it in my head instead of multiplying it out. Why? Because I know that 250 times 4 is 1,000. 250, 250, 250, 250. And then I know the 6 left over from each. And 6 times 4 is 24, so I add that. Yeah, 1,024. So that is also just a little extra tidbit of information. That is how many kilobytes in a megabyte. Okay, so what letter is that? There's no letter for that. Oh, it says write the answer. So yeah, you just write 1,024. That's the answer. Oh wait, is it the answer? What did I forget? No, I did that. What I forgot something. Remember I told you in the very beginning? No, there's no decimal. The negatives, right? Because if it's an odd number exponent, negative 1,024. Okay? Alright, Jane's garden measures 3 1/3 yards. So what you need to do for this problem, a word problem, you need to go ahead and label what everything is or draw a picture. You have to go. Okay, so for this problem right here, we're going to draw a picture. Alright, so on this picture it says Jane's garden is 3 1/3 yards on 2 edges. So let's make a garden. This garden is actually a rectangle, and it's 3 1/3 on 2 edges. So that means 2 sides probably right across from each other is 3 1/3, and 1 5/6 on 2 edges. 1 5/6. So that means 2 sides are the same and 2 sides are the same on the other side. What is the total distance around Jane's garden? So how would I figure out the total distance around with those numbers? If I was going to multiply, that would be something to do with finding the area, which is all the distance inside, all this. But I'm just trying to find the perimeter right now, the distance around. Add everything, right? We're going to add all 4 sides together, and that will give us the answer. So it's easier to add the ones that are the same together first, right? Add the 2 3 1/3 and add the 2 1 5/6. Add those first. So 3 1/3 plus 3 1/3 Okay, so what do you get when you add those two? 6 and 2/3, right? Because you just add the numbers on top, the numerators. Okay, that's from two sides of it. We have to add that to whatever the other two sides are. Okay, so what are the other two ones? It's 1 and 5/6 plus 1 and 5/6. Good. Now can we reduce the 2 and 10/6? Yeah, to what? Well, no, we're going to just leave the 2 there. We're going to just reduce the fraction part because I can divide 2 into both the 10 and the 6. So this is the same as 2 and 5/3, right? I just reduced it by dividing by 2. Okay, so now I can add this and this together. And it makes it nice because they have the same denominator. So 6, change the ink, 6 and 2/3 plus 5 and 5/3 equals 7/3 here, 11 and 7/3. Is that my final answer? Except for the fraction, the number on top is larger, right? 7 is larger than 3. Yeah, because you take the number on the top and divide by the number on the bottom. 7 divided by 3. 7 divides by 3 2 times and leaves 1 left over. So I add the 2 to the 11. And it's 13 and 1/3. Good. Alright, page 15, problem 15 for the general math. Okay, Krista has weighed out 5.341 milligrams. Okay, so write down what you see when you do a word problem. Write down the numbers. 5.341 milligrams of a chemical for a science experiment. She needs a total of 6.5 milligrams of that chemical. Okay, how much more does she need? Well, this is how much she has, right? But she needs 6.5. So how do I figure out how much more she needs? Well, yeah, you're going to add or subtract. Which one? I mean, this is how many you need and this is how many you have. Subtract it. So I line up my decimals, right? 6.5 is the larger number. When you do subtraction, the larger number goes on top. 6.5 is larger than 5.3. So line up the decimals like that and subtract them. And then you want to add some zeros, right? Whenever you have decimal numbers, you can add as many zeros. Good. Right, I added 2 zeros because you can do that after the decimal and then subtract. 0, you can't subtract 0 from 1 or 1 from 0, so you have to borrow, right? Can't borrow from the 0, so you got to go all the way to the 5. So it becomes a 4. Then you give it to the next one over, and then since you still need 1, you make that a 9. And this becomes a 1, so 10. And so when you do the subtraction, you get 9, 5, 1, 1. Right. That's how many more milligrams of the compound she needs, or the chemical. On page 15, problem 18 on the general math STAR test review, it's a word problem, and it says Harry started a mountain hike at 7 a.m. It was 2 degrees Celsius at that time. So at 7 a.m. he started hiking. Okay, hiking. He started. Okay, you got to try to make sense of the information. So if he started at 7 a.m. and it was 2 degrees at that time, we want to write 7 a.m. he started and it was 2 degrees Celsius. Okay, you can put the C if you want. Okay, now as the sun rose, Harry's hiking path turned to a less shaded ground. The temperature increased by 3 degrees. The final part of Harry's hike was a sharp ascent to the tundra region. At the same time he reached the top of the mountain, the temperature had decreased. So it went up 3 degrees. Okay, the first thing it went is increased by 3. So the second part of the hike, it doesn't give us the time, but it says second part, add 3 degrees, right? Now, the last part of the hike, it decreased, minus 7 degrees. Last. So it's all about organizing the information, okay? So it went from 2 degrees, plus 3 degrees, minus 7 degrees. So what was the temperature at the final temperature? Minus 2, because 2 plus 3 is 5, minus 7 makes negative 2. It's negative 2 degrees Celsius. Okay, this is on page 16, problem F, example F. Okay, it says write 7 over 20 as a decimal and a percent. So 7 over 20, if I want to write that as a decimal and a percent, okay, there's a couple of tricks. First you want to change it to a decimal number. So 7 over 20 is a fraction, right? 7 divided by 20. So to get it to a decimal number, you just have to divide it. 7 divided by 20. And so, how do you divide 7 by 20? What's the first step? Well, you have to add a decimal and some zeros because 7 is smaller than 20. Right? So you add a decimal and some zeros like that. As soon as you can add as many zeros as you want if you put a decimal there. Now you just divide it out. Now you can go ahead and move this decimal straight up on top so you know where it goes in the answer. But pretend like it's not even there when you do the division. So how many times does 20 divide into 7? It doesn't, right? It divides into 70 3 times. So, and that means we subtract. And then, how many times does 20 divide into 100? So the decimal number is 0.35. How do you change that to a percent? You just move it to. A decimal number, you move the decimal 2 places to the right, and you have a percent number. So it's 35%. This is on the general math STAR test prep, and it's on page 16, problem example G. The caterer made pies for a dinner party. 1/4 of the pies were eaten the first time the party came through the serving line. 5/8 of the remaining pies were eaten by the time the caterer picked up the leave. What percent of the pies were not eaten? Okay, so we know 2 pieces of information. Okay, we know that 1/4 of the pies were eaten the first time they went through to eat, like first serving. 1/4 pies eaten. Organize your information is the first step. Okay? And I think it's eaten with an E. Okay, so now one other thing. What other information do we know? We know 5/8 of the pies were remaining. So 5/8 remaining. Okay, so we know if 1/4 pies were eaten the first time, 5/8 were remaining when he left. It says what percent of the pies were not eaten. Okay, so this here is useful information. It's useless information. The 1/4, this part, we don't need it, because the only thing it's asking us is how much of the pies weren't eaten. And we look at this right here. It says 5/8 of the pies were remaining when he went to leave. So how much of the pies weren't eaten? If there was 5/8 left, how do you figure out how do I figure out what fraction of the pies were left? 5/8 are gone. 5/8 are remaining. So let me double check this. 5/8 of the pies were 5/8 of the remaining pies were eaten by the time the caterer picked up to leave. Okay. Well, let me go ahead and just try to work this out and see if you can follow along. Okay, I think this is the way that it's trying to set it up. You got 1/4 of the pies were eaten the first time through. This may be useful information after all. And then 5/8 of the pies were eaten by the time the caterer picked up to leave. Now, the key word is remaining pies. So, how many were remaining after the first trip through the line? 3/4, right? If 1/4 is gone, 3/4 is remaining after the first trip. Okay, then 5/8 of the remaining pies were eaten by the time the caterer picked up to leave. So 3/4 of the pies are left minus 5/8. Wait. 5/8 of the pies were remaining by the time, So subtract it, because that's how much were left when he went to leave out of the 3/4. You're going to have to find a common denominator. Okay, because the 8s, you have to have 8s on the bottom. See, 4 and 8, you can't do anything until you get the same number on the bottom. So I have to ask myself, what's the lowest common denominator? Okay, well, 8, 2 times 4 is 8, so I know that they both can have 8s on the bottom. So I'm going to leave some space right here, and then write 8 across from it. Then I have to ask myself, what factor do I use? 8 times what gives me 8? 8 times 1, right? And whatever I use down here on the bottom, I use up here on the numerator. That's 5. See, 5 times 1 is 5. That's where I get that. And then 4 times 2 is 8. So that's the number I'm going to use here. And on top, I get 6. So subtract that, 1/8. It's 1/8. Now, what does that mean, though? 1/8 is what? 1/8 is the fraction of the pies that were remaining when he went to leave. Right? Okay. So now what percent is that? Because it doesn't ask us for the fraction. It asks us for the percent. How do I get the percent out of that? Divide. Divide 1 divided by 8. Because that's what this means. 1 divided by 8. 1 divided by 8. Well, let's add a decimal and some zeros. So 8 divides into 10 once. Subtract 8. Bring down your 0. 8 divides into 20 2 times. That leaves, subtract 16. Now you got 40. And this is 5. So the answer is 0.125 when I do the division. 0.125. Is that the percent? So what's the final answer? Okay, so good job. So again, we need to move this decimal 2 places to the right, and that becomes 12.5%. That's all you have to do is move it to the right. 12.5% of the pies were not eaten out of the remaining pies. Okay? Page 17, problem 19 on the General Math STAR Test Prep Book. And if you look at the problem, it says write each fraction as a decimal and as a percent. So you need to be able to do both, and we went over that already. So I think you know this one. If you look at problem the first, there's 3 different fractions it asks you to perform this on. The first one says 1/4, the next one says 3/8, and the next one says 17/20. So how do you get the decimal? Divide it. So each one of these fractions, you're going to divide it out to get the decimal number. And then after you get the decimal, you're going to move it 2 places to the right to get the percent. So you could set this up like columns, right? Okay, so 2.5 you say, huh? Okay, that would be right, because 1/4, 1/4 is a quarter. It's like 4 quarters out of 100. When we do decimals and percents, it means parts of 100, right? So 1/4, a quarter of 100 is 25, right? So the decimal number, when you divide it out, 1 divided by 4, you're going to wind up getting 0.25, and your percent is 25%. Okay, so on the next one, see, sometimes they're not so easy. You have to do the division. So you need to divide 3 divided by 8 on the next problem. You should have got point, right, 0.375, and then what's the percent? Good, 37.5%. And then there's just one more to do. And that one is going to be 17 divided by 20, right? One of the most important things is to remember which number goes underneath the division bracket. Because if you don't remember that, you'll get it wrong. Alright, you say the answer is 0.135, so let's see if that is correct. Let's add some zeros and change the ink. Okay, 20 divides into 170 8 times. That gives us 160. Okay. I got 0.85. So check your division. You need to okay. Can you see how I did it? You understand how I got 0.85? Look at page 18, problem 24. It says which shows 0.696 0.696 as a fraction in simplest form. And it actually has a 0 in front of it, right? But that really won't change anything. So a fraction, how would I change this, what I have written here, to a fraction? What you see up there on the board. How would I change that to a fraction? Well, not really. What you do is you have to know your place value. What place value is the number just to the right of the decimal? The tenths, or the TH. Then what? Hundredths with the TH. And then thousands with the TH. So to make this into a fraction, I just look at my last digit on my right, and whatever place it's in, I put that number on the bottom. So I'm going to put 1,000 on the bottom. I'm going to put 696 over 1,000. Because the 6 is in the thousands place, I can just put 1,000 underneath it, and that becomes a fraction. Because if I multiply this or divide this out, I'll get back the same number, the 0.696. That's the simple way of changing it into a fraction, okay? Just count what place value the last digit is, put that number on the bottom. Now, is this the simplest form? You have to ask yourself, see, there's no answer in the test book that gives this as the answer because you have to reduce it. Can you reduce 696 divided by over 1,000? How would you reduce it? How do you reduce a fraction? Divide. You have to think of a number that divides into both. What number would divide into both? 2 will work for sure. Is there a bigger number so we can save some time? Because if you use the smallest number possible, you may have to do this 3 or 4 times. 3. 3 won't work on the 1,000. How about 4? Think it might work on the top number? We don't know for sure yet. Okay, let's check it out. 696 divided by 4. That's going to be 1. And I wrote this kind of sloppy. 1, 4, 2, 9, 7, 28, 16. It does work. 174. 4 divides into 696 174 times. So to reduce this, divide this by 4, top and bottom, and I'll get 174 on top, right? Huh? Right, we're not done yet. Can you reduce this any further? I get 250 on the bottom, right? 250 on the bottom? Because dividing 1,000 by 4? Okay, so can I reduce this down smaller? Well, like you said, what if we try 2? Let's try 2 again. So 174 divided by 2. That's going to give me 8, 16, 1, 4, 87, right? And 250 divided by 2 is what? We can do that in our head. 125. Is that one of the answers? I think it may be the answer because now we have an odd number and an even, no, 2 odd numbers. But this is divisible by 5. And this is divisible by General Math Star Test another odd number. Which fraction is you can't divide it by a repeating decimal? It may be a prime number. Okay, so how would we figure out if there's any number of these fractions gives divide into 87? A is 4/5. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. All right, so 87 over 125. If that's one of the answers, there's a good chance that's it. C gives us 7 over 20, and D gives us 5 over 9. You could always try 17 to see if that works because 17 over 25 is one of the answers. So that would mean you'd have to divide it by 5. They're all division, right? You can't divide 87 by 5, so that can't be an answer. Decimal by dividing that's the answer. 87 over 125. Each fraction. Now, I know off the top of my head that B, 3/4, is 75%. So that's not a repeating decimal. I mean, it's just 75%. So let's go ahead and look at the answers and then cross out the ones you know can't be true. We know that B is not going to be one of the possible answers because 3 divided by 4 is 75%. That's not a repeating decimal. Okay, so the other ones, I know that 4/5, that's a pretty even number. That's 80%. Because if you break up 100% into 5 parts, each piece is 20%, so 4 of them would be 80%, even. So that can't be an answer. It's not a repeating decimal. It could be C or D. We won't know till we divide it out. So what we need to do is take 7 divided by 20, add a 0, a couple zeros, and see what we get. So 20 divides into 70 3 times. Okay, you were right. That one stops, right? I actually put an extra 0, which might be confusing. I get 35%. Okay? So I know that stops. Oh, that's not the answer, though. So I don't know why I circled it. That can't be the answer because it stops. So it's got to be D. But we can just go ahead and do the division just to confirm that we're right and we didn't make a mistake somewhere. 5 divided by 9. Add a decimal and some zeros. 9 divides into 50. 5 times. 9 times 5 is 45. I'll have to go home then. Okay. And then 0, 5. It's gonna continue to be 5 every time. Remainder of 5. It keeps repeating. So that's the answer, D.